around then, and will recall there was a question about whether or not somebody was qualified to be on the ballot. Again, because of my training and background, every year, I gather data every year, the results of elections every year, and I maintain that data, and I create my own database and my own histories. So I knew when I checked the Detroit database, I knew that Mr. Duggan wasn't here long enough.
Right.
But I wasn't sure. To me, it was incredible. It was hard to believe that somebody as sophisticated as he is, at least that's our perception, would not be aware of the requirement that you must be here a year and be a registered elector, which is in a different section of the charter for that year. So I personally went out to Livonia, to the city clerk's office there, because I saw when he shows his registering here in Detroit. And so I got into the car and quietly, without telling anybody, I went out to Livonia and looked at the voters' roll there as to when did he unregister there, and I saw that date matched the date that he registered with Detroit, which means if I add those dates together, he's going to be a little over a month or better short of being qualified to be on the ballot. So I knew this about 9 months ahead of time, and several months before the deadline came in to turn in your stuff. I knew it, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell my campaign director. I didn't tell anybody. I kept it to myself. And then I waited until the deadlines had passed, and that's when I then told somebody other than myself. And we then wound up filing a lawsuit, which then removed him from the ballot, which is when he then launched his write-in campaign. He knew that it is impossible to win a write-in campaign. He knew it. And he made that very clear when he left town. And he was very disappointed. Then, mysteriously, he decides, well, I'm going to run as a write-in, which was fine, but we just knew there's no way that can happen. And, of course, large sums of money poured in. But what became obvious and clear as we were going along is a lot of laws, election laws, were being broken. When you saw in that video that they just showed, you saw him there with a ballot, where the young lady wrote, whoever it was, wrote the name in across the bottom of the ballot, the commercial. That was an actual live ballot from precinct 154, I believe it was. It was an actual live ballot. But the ballots hadn't been printed yet. That meant he had the template. He could only have gotten that template from the city clerk's office, Miss Winfrey's office. That's the only place it could have came from. And so we raised that later on during the course of our recon as we alleged the fraud. We laid out a very specific complaint, laying out the various items that we have discovered, that the names on the poll books did not match those names of the people who sent back their ballots. We said that there were more ballots being sent back or being counted than there were being returned. So then during the course of the recount, I was so sure that I'm going to perform an audit like we would do, but no one would know that I'm actually auditing. The first thing we did was we subpoenaed the printer's manifest. That's never been done before in the history of the city. A manifest is the document that says, what did you print, Mr. Printer, for every precinct, and how many did you deliver to the city of Detroit, and when did you deliver them? The printer refused to respond to the subpoena. And it was the day before we were about to go in and serve him with a show cause order that he delivered the response. And so now we knew how many ballots they printed. The first thing that jumps right out at you is they printed 35,000 extra blank absentee ballots, identical to the absentee ballots that are actually given to the general public. 35,000 extras that no one ever sees and they're never accounted for. Then we start doing the recount, and I'm just going to cut to the chase on the recount. But it became clear as they brought in case after case after case, dozens and dozens, and we had probably 250 people in the room who saw it, who were shocked. The handwriting was the same. We then hired a handwriting expert who then opined, who gave the opinion that 54% or 44% of the ballots were in the same hand. I was so sure that if you were to open up a case, I told this to the county board of canvass, I'm so sure that if you open a case and you count the number of ballots in that case, the number of names on the poll book, and then count the remaining blank ballots, subtract that from the numbers printed from the printer's manifest, because now we know how many he printed for that precinct. The number should come to 0. But instead it was 80 and 90 off by each precinct. It's because they're taking the ballots out, changing a name, sticking another ballot in, and no one's the wiser.